do that tonight if you want. You want to do that? Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. So we have Mike Moy is going to, good evening, everyone. I'll have some opening remarks in a few moments, but just to get started, as you know the drill, we usually do the Pledge of Allegiance first. And Mike Moy, we have our board members going to come up front. Just a real quick thank you also to Mike for also recommending our speaker and giving me the contact information for our speaker, Jack McSherry, tonight. So thanks again to Mike. And I'm sorry, thanks again to Mike, and also thanks to Jack and Jack III for being here. So is Mike, you ready to come up to do the pledge? Okay, we'll get started, and then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll go back to me then. Okay, I have the mic for you. And Steve, we have from the Civil War Round Table has an announcement about a dinner for veterans, and I'll let Steve have the mic here. Here you go.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Steve Smith, and I'm the past president of the Harrisburg Civil War Roundtable, and now I handle programs and field trips for them. We have a table set up in the lobby out there. I wanted to just quickly give you a preview of our program for next Friday, which is Veterans Day. And it's a very special day for our roundtable. And to make it extra special, we went out and recruited John Heiser, who had 40 years experience as a park ranger in Gettysburg and just recently retired. He's coming out of retirement to give a talk on the Great Reunion of 1913 at Gettysburg, where 50,000 former Confederate and Union veterans came back and buried the hatchet right on the eve of World War I, when we really needed national reconciliation in a big way. We thought that's a special topic for a special date for special people, and to make it extra special, our president decided we're going to invite veterans to come and dine courtesy of the Roundtable, a free dinner for our vets. So if you're interested, our meeting place is Central Penn College. That's our new venue. We don't meet at the Penn Harris anymore. We moved to Central Penn in September, and it's working out great. We have a wonderful buffet meal set up and ready to go. We just need people to make their RSVP by Monday at noon so we can give a head count to Central Penn. But whether you've worn the nation's cloth in combat or in peacetime, the veterans are special to us, and we want to treat them special on Veterans Day. I'll be out in the lobby to discuss it more with anybody who's interested after the program tonight, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and I think it sounds like a worthwhile event to me, so I encourage you, those of you that want to attend to please sign up. And it is a very speedy turnaround time, so by Monday, he's asking for people to sign up. All right, so welcome once again, and thanks for all the veterans here, and especially a shout out for our World War II veterans. Let's have a raise of hands. Do we just have Jack tonight as a World War II veteran? Do we have other World War II veterans in attendance too? We used to have a lot. Any other ones? Raise a hand, any other World War II veterans? Oh, good, we have a couple other ones. Okay, let's give a round of applause. Back in the middle, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I also want to thank real quick, we have all our former presidents right here, and the current president. So we have Bill Jackson here, Kirk Gibson, and we also have Charlie Lloyd, our current president, right here in the front. So thank you to all of them for what you do. And you know, one of the things that got me inspired to join the Roundtable as a volunteer was, of course, the World War II veterans had to come in first and foremost in hearing their stories, but almost a tie with that, or right after, was the presidents and what you guys do, and how nice you made the meetings for us all to enjoy. And I know I might not be as good a speaker as some of these other guys, but I do want to still volunteer and help out as best I can. Anyway, we try. Okay. So our speaker tonight, I'm sorry, we need to get the money, right? So the helmet committee's in the back. They'll be happy to take your donations on the way out the door. It's not required, obviously. We're not going to grab you by the coattails or anything. It's just a matter of a voluntary donation if you want to. But we do appreciate it if you can, because it helps our operations. Last month we had two veterans who, a historian and a veteran who had different hotel rooms, so that was a significant cost for our round table, which we do have limited funds, and so that was something that really helped us out to people that donate. Okay, and we do ask you to turn off your cell phones. Most of you probably already know the drill and have done that, or have them on silent, either way, just in case there's a ring coming in or something. And then, okay, so I think that's most of what we had to talk about for the up front. Let's go to our speaker, Jack McSherry III. His father, a World War I veteran, actually, who was called back to serve in World War II. So very few can say they served in both world wars. I mean, that's amazing if you served in one, but to serve in 2 world wars, we hope and pray there will never be another World War III or anything else, but if there is, it's unimaginable what the scale might be given World War II and World War I. But he also had several brothers who served in World War II alongside him in the Navy, all in the Navy, a Navy family. So they kept the tradition strong and alive for the Navy service and their family. Now, Jack himself served as a quartermaster, which he steered the ship and do different things, and he was trained, of course, during the war, and he went into duty serving towards the end of World War II in the Atlantic Ocean. You've seen in the postcards and the emails that he had a fantastic thing. I'll let him go in more detail about going overboard on the ship, and if that's not a hook to get you to come tonight, I don't know what it is. They say, as editors, they want to give the hook to get you to come in or read the story, and that's something I think that really is going to pull you in, and maybe why you're here tonight, maybe. But he also said he got in this little incidents on some of the towns or different things, and so he'll tell you some of the fun stories tonight and some things that happened. He served from 45 to 49 in the U.S. Navy, and then he became an engineer alongside his son, Jack III, is here tonight as well. They actually still work together. So Jack Jr., our speaker, World War II veteran, is 94 years old now, and he's still working. So he said in his bio, he sent us to the round table, he said, when I get old enough, I'll think about retiring. So, hey, if you guys want to go to 94, all of you here, right? You going to work till you're 94? Okay. But that's amazing to me. So I don't have any relatives that work that long, so that's amazing to me. But that is very something we should applaud. And so I think I should turn over to Jack now. Obviously he's our highlight here, so I'll let him come up stage and on stage. And please come up and shake his hand at the end and say hi to him. He has a lot of interesting artifacts here and photographs and uniforms and different things for you to view as well and talk to him. Okay, guys, so thanks and enjoy the evening, and I'll hand it over to Jack then. He has a lapel, I think. You have a lapel here, right, Jack? Okay. A microphone, lapel?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you don't need this one. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay, guys. Jack can, thank you. Who can take over? Thanks.
I'm supposed to go up there. Oh. Yeah, I'll take that. I'm not going to walk on that. This is my memory. Good evening. I am Jack McSherry. I was in the Navy during World War II. My father was in the Navy for 36 years. My 2 brothers were each in the Navy during World War II. So we have a lot of Navy in the family. I haven't seen it since I'm here, but there was some kind of a biography written about me that I think was publicized, and they must have got it from the movie studio or something, because it wasn't me. So I have a paragraph here that I'm explaining that that's not me. That's the way I'll start this. Anyway, yes, I'll start this way. My father enlisted in the Navy in 1907. He went around the world with Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet, which consisted of 16 battleships. It took him almost 2 years to go around the world. And he said, always said, that was a highlight of his life. Anyway, he did that, and then when he was 54 years old, before Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, 7 months before, he was called back into active duty again at the age of 54. Spent the whole World War II in the Navy. He was in World War I also in between. Anyway, I will in the beginning of the war, I was home, and the war was already going on over in Europe, but we weren't in it yet. And I used to spend time in the attic of my house. I had a cardboard desk up there that I made. I used that for whatever I wanted to do. And my mother was downstairs. She called up to me. She said, "Come on down and listen to the radio." It was December 7th, 1941. So I went down and I listened to the radio. They were describing the attack on Pearl Harbor, and those were dark days. We didn't stabilize for months after that. It took us a long time to get back on our feet. But then we started fighting Japan in earnest, and of course drove them back to Japan again. So before that war was over, of course, my both brothers were also in the Navy. So when my dad first came into the area, after he went around the world with a Great White Fleet, it was about 1907, a little later, they were building some dams for the Roaring Creek Water Company in Lancaster area, and he got a job there. So that's how we ended up living in Shamokin. Well, we lived 3 miles from Shamokin, and that's where we lived during World War II. So I saw the war from a child's point of view. And the problem was, it was right after the Great Depression, and the young men, of course, were working in what they called the CCC camps, and they had good training. They learned a lot. They learned how to take care of themselves. And when they got drafted into the military, they were good. They knew what they were doing, and they could do it. And that's why we were so victorious, because of the education and ability of all those young men that were drafted into the military. The draft age was from 18 to 33, 18 to 33. And anybody in that age bracket could be drafted, and you go in the Army, you go in the Marines, you go in the Navy. Most of them went in the Army. So I'll talk a little bit about the Great Depression first, because that came first. The financial market collapsed in 1929. That's when everybody was going bankrupt. The banks were closing down, and there was no activity monetarily at all. And that was a disaster. I was born 1 year after the disaster, but after I got a little older, I did observe, and I could see the effect on all the people. The men were all being laid off from their jobs, and that was a disaster for them because they didn't have any income at all. So they'd do what they could to earn money. They might do a chore for a neighbor or whatever they could do. But there was also men from far away, maybe 100 miles away, that they would jump on a freight train where they lived and ride on that train and maybe go through where we lived and jump off the train. And they were hungrier than all heck because they didn't eat for days. They'd go around and knock on all the doors of the people in that area and ask for a sandwich. Of course, my mother always fed them. The dumb thing was, they were commonly known as bums. They weren't bums. They were guys that were looking for work. And I don't think they found much work because there wasn't any work to be had, but at least they were looking. So the only way they could survive, they had to maybe work for a neighbor. We were better off because my dad was retired from the Navy at the time, and he had a pension check coming in every month. So, and I know for a fact that my dad was very generous with his luck. There was a family that lived near us. They must have had about 10 kids. They were poorer than all heck. And I remember he used to sneak down there with a bag of groceries regularly and give it to them. That was the attitude of the people in those days. They helped each other. Anyway, so, yeah. Anyway, before the Depression, men were making about $20 a week, which was adequate. And that would buy their food. Bread cost 10 cents a loaf. Milk was 10 cents a quart. And we had milk delivered to our house every day, put it in a milk box outside. Periodically, the milkman would put a bill in there, then my mother would take the money and put it in a box and pay for the milk. That's the way that worked. And if they wanted a real treat, like on a Saturday, they'd go into Shamokin, nearby town, to a bakery, and they'd buy a loaf of bread that was just out of the oven, take that home and slice it and eat it while it was still warm, and that was a real treat. And during the day, well, for breakfast, we had almost always just cereal. They had puffed rice, puffed wheat, corn flakes, and the typical one, shredded wheat. Those were the cereals that we had, and that's what we had for breakfast. For lunch, we'd get a sandwich. Hopefully we had some lunch meat in the refrigerator, and we'd get some meat in our sandwich. If we didn't have the meat, we got jelly in our sandwich, which was all right. It filled us up. So things were tough during the Depression, even for us, and we were better off than almost anybody in the neighborhood. And to get groceries, we'd go to the local grocery store. When I was still home, I know I walked about 3/4 of a mile to the grocery store. My mother gave me a list of things to get. And what you had to do in that grocery store, you stood in line and waited until your turn came. Then the clerk, the owner of the store, would take your list and gather all this stuff off of his counters and put it in a bag for you. You'd pay for it and go. And some people didn't pay for it right away because the stores had a list of names there where it was just added to the money that you already owe them. They'd add the new money, and eventually you'd pay that bill off. But the stores had this. They didn't charge. They put it on a list, and you pay it when you could. And speaking of food, food was expensive. Most people had a garden in their yard, but they raised simple things like tomatoes, onions, lettuce, radishes, and they would, of course, eat them. Another thing that was very inexpensive, you go in your lawn or in the lawn or the pasture next door, and you'd cut the dandelion. It's a weed. And they cut the dandelion off the stalk, take that home, and clean it, cook it, and usually put a little bit of bacon in it with it when they're cooking it. Then they'd put that over potatoes, either mashed or boiled, and that was their dinner. But that was a good dinner. And we lived in a rural development, actually. There was a lot of houses there, but it was a rural setting. And we had a very large yard. My dad bought a few extra acres when he bought the house. And then we had a farmer that owned land behind us. And he never did anything with his land. He never cultivated it. He never did anything with it. It just grew wild. But he allowed anybody could go onto his land anytime they wanted to and do whatever they wanted to. Of course, we used to spend a lot of time doing things on his land. But on that land, there was a patch of wild strawberries, there was some blueberries, there was raspberries, and there was blackberries. And we'd go up there, we could get a bucket full of berries, take them home, and usually they turned into a pie, but sometimes we just ate them as they were. Maybe put them in a bowl and a little bit of milk on them and ate them that way. So that was another source of our food. Oh, this is a good thing here. I hope there's some school teachers here. But anyway, we went to an elementary school. It was about a half mile from our house in a little village of Overlook. And of course, we walked that half mile every day to school and back. But we took a shortcut through the farmers' fields. But we had to hike to school each day. And it was a brick building. It had 4 classrooms, and it had 4 teachers, and it had 8 grades, 1 through 8. And the way they taught there, the 4 teachers, 1 would be in each room. There'd be a teacher, and the first and second grade would have a teacher, a second and third had a teacher, third and fourth, or fourth and fifth had a teacher, and of course, all the way up to 7th and 8th had a teacher. So the 4 teachers, each one taught 2 classes. What they did, they'd have the one class sitting on this side of their half of the room, and the other class sitting over this side. And the teacher would teach the one group, say the 3rd grade, they would teach the 3rd grade. At the same time, they'd give an assignment to the ones in the 4th grade who were in the same room to do some work at their desk while they were sitting there. So they were studying an assignment while these people were being lectured by the teacher. And they made it work. I spent the whole 8 years in that school, 7 years, I guess it was, and I learned more in that school than I ever did in any high school or anything since. And we had 3 women teachers and 1 man teacher. 3 of the women were very nice, easy to get along with, and let's see, what did I say? We had We had 8 teachers. No, we had 4 teachers. So we only had one in each room. And they were all girls or ladies, except one. He was a man. And that man was extremely interesting. The ladies were very gentle and very nice people. This man, he had his own systems. He maintained discipline in his classes. And if you didn't behave yourself, he had a big stick. He'd come over and whack you on the seat with it. And if you're really bad, he'd take you into the cloakroom and paddle you with a stick. He had a big stick. And he also, he made some of the boys, they'd have to stand there with their arms out like this, and he put about 2 books on each hand and make them stand there for like 15 minutes, but his arms would start going down like this. The teacher would come up behind him and whack him on the seat with a paddle, then the arms would go back up again. That was his discipline. But you know what? I liked that teacher, and so did everybody else. He wasn't a mean guy. He really didn't hurt anybody. He just embarrassed the kids. He didn't hit them too hard. He never punished a girl. And so he was a good teacher, contrary to the way it sounds. I suppose today he'd be in jail. But then, where the heck did I leave off? Yeah, this one day, this friend of mine and we went out for our recess. Every afternoon we had a 15-minute recess where we could go outside and run around. And there was a farm next door with a stream running through it in a little woods. So this friend and I, we went down to the stream and in our clothes, and we were wading around in the water and jumping in it. And after about 20 minutes or more, we thought, well, our 15 minutes are probably up, and we went back into schoolroom. So I went into the classroom, and we were both soaking wet. The teacher was appalled. So our punishment was very interesting. He had to write revolutionary 2,000 times, and I had to write extraordinary 2,000 times. And we couldn't leave the school except to go home in the evenings, but we couldn't leave the school in any of the recesses or even at noon time until we wrote those names or those words. And it took several days to do that. But that was our punishment. But that was a very nice lady that made us do that. She was one of the nicest teachers that I ever knew. So, see, we didn't get mad at her. We did what we had to do, and we liked her. One time this man teacher, George Vogt, he got me. I was sitting at my desk, and I had a bow tie on, a leather bow tie with a strap around elastic strap around my neck to hold it on. And I was trying to be funny, so I took it off, put the strap underneath my chin, and put the bow on the top of my head. And I was looking at my friend across the room, and we were both laughing. Next thing I knew, George was behind me. He whacked me with his big stick. But he didn't stop there. He made me sit with the girls. The girls were on one side of the room and the boys on the other side of the room. So that was punishment. So he didn't say which girl, so I went and sat alongside the one that I liked the most. And that worked out all right. And so the school days in those days were totally different than what they are today. All we had in that school, we had books, we'd get a new tablet every month, we'd get a new pencil every month, and that was it. And we had, of course, the books, some were so ragged you could hardly turn the pages, but we had books for every subject also. But that was our school life, but it was good. It worked, and we were happy. Yeah. Oh, clothing. At that time, clothing was very expensive for, considering nobody was making any money. So everybody was walking around with patches on their clothes, especially the kids. All the kids wore overalls. That's the bib overalls. That's what all of them wore. But they all had big patches on them, especially the knees were always the first thing to get patched. And they would wear those overalls everywhere they went, no matter where it was. Overalls that was their clothing for every day. And they wore them to school. So there was no one dressed fancy. The people didn't dress fancy. They just dressed with what they had. Oh, now, the state law required that the schools are open and you go to school for 8 months, and for 9 months it was that you had to go to school. But we only went to school for 8 months because we lived in a rural area, so they left us out early in the spring so we could help on the farm. I didn't live on a farm, so I got an extra month or whatever it was of vacation in the summer, and I liked that. So basically, that's life in the Depression. I had a wagon once that was bought in a store when I was real little, but later in life, we still lived in the same place. If I wanted a wagon, I made one. And to get the materials for the wagon, I'd walk about probably a mile to the big dump, and that's where I'd get my board for the seat. I'd get my wheels off of a baby carriage or whatever else was in the dump, and I built my own wagon, and all the kids did that. We'd ride down the hill in our wagons. I made several wagons that way. But any materials that I ever needed to make anything, I went to the dump and got them. One time, I got a real bonus. I went over there and I found a board about this long, and it was full of bent nails that were pounded into it, just loaded with them. So I took that home and straightened all the nails out, and I had a good batch of nails to use on my next project. That's the way it worked. So I guess that's primarily life, unless you think of something that I didn't mention. That's the Great Depression that I lived through. There's a book there I wrote about the Great Depression. We lived in Sunnyside, so the title of that book is what is it? Life in the Great Depression, and life in heaven in Sunnyside is what I said. I can read that, huh? The title is Paradise in Sunnyside, Life in the Great Depression. And this describes all the happy things and the easy things that I did when I was a kid. I just brought it along. I'm not telling anybody to buy it. I just brought it along. I thought it'd be interesting to somebody. Anyway, okay. Now I think we more or less got past the Depression. Does anybody have any questions, or do I have to clarify anything about the Great Depression? Yeah.
Did girls wear overalls too, or just the guys?
Most of the girls didn't wear overalls. They usually wore dresses. Yeah. It wasn't girl-like to wear overalls. That'd be pretty bad. I didn't think of that, but that's the way it was. I remember that. Okay. Now, if we're out of the Depression, and the reason we got out of the Depression is thanks to Adolf Hitler. That guy, you know, that monster, he was crazy, and he ruled Germany, but he got us out of the Depression by starting a war. Because when the war started, our factories started working to build weapons and anything we needed to fight the war, and we were sending things over to England to help England. They were in the war before we got there. So the Great Depression went away when World War II started. So, but at that time, Hitler's army, or Air Force actually, was bombing England constantly, day and night, primarily London. They pretty well destroyed London. And Hitler wanted to invade England. That's the way you capture it and keep it. But the dumb guy couldn't figure out how to get his troops across the English Channel. So he didn't invade. He just kept bombing them, but he never invaded them because he didn't know how. So that war was going on for quite a while, and we did everything we could to help England. We, of course, gave them food and weapons and medicine, and but we didn't actually. We weren't in the war yet. But we helped England in any way we could. So they held on all right. But then it happened. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, was one of our big Navy stations in Hawaii, and that made us madder than heck. We hated the Japanese, and they killed 3,000 people in on that raid, and it sunk several of our ships. Of course, that was their goal. They were trying to get our aircraft carriers, but they weren't there at that time. They were out at sea somewhere, so they didn't get them. But they got several battleships and other smaller ships and killed a lot of people. So that was what put us in the war, because the very next day after that raid, we declared war on Germany, Japan, and Italy. Italy was an ally of Germany. So we declared war on all of them, and we were in the war. And when that happened, I think, did I say this already, that I was in the attic when, I already said that, okay, we won't say it again. Okay. And I think I told you that my dad, of course, was in the Navy most of his life. He enlisted in 1907. And I think it was in 1941, 7 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was called back into the Navy again at the age of 54. He spent another 6 years in the Navy. But he was a chief quartermaster. And a quartermaster steers the ship. He writes the ship's log. He does the navigation on a small ship, and he works with a navigator on a big ship. So that's what he did. And he was on a 90-foot long wooden minesweeper in the Atlantic at the time, when Germany was dropping mines off the east coast of the United States, and our ships were hitting them and sinking. So the minesweeper was out there to clear the mines from the Atlantic. And he had a small crew. He was second in command as a chief petty officer. There was, I think, an ensign was a captain of the ship. But they would cut the mines loose. They were on a cable. They'd cut them loose. They'd come to the surface of the water. Then they'd shoot them with their .50 caliber machine gun and blow them up. And that way they got rid of them. This one time they saw a German submarine. The periscope was up out of the water. So they chased after it. They had a 50 caliber machine gun on the ship. And they chased after the German sub. Of course, the sub had real big guns on the ship, and they had torpedoes. Well, they ran away when they saw them coming. The Germans retreated away from this minesweeper, which was a good thing, because if the minesweeper would have caught up to the German sub, they'd have been sunk. They wouldn't have stood a chance. But anyway, they chased it anyway. I think, yeah, I told you about the draft age and the attack on Pearl Harbor. Yeah, okay, going back to the attack on Pearl Harbor, they were successful. The Japanese were successful there. They weakened us, and it took us about a month to get our strength back again. We got more ships, and they were building a ship a day at that time. And they built up the fleet. So when the Japs had us pushed back to Australia almost, we got several new ships on our Navy, and suddenly the tide turned. The Japs were heading back toward Japan, and we were chasing them. And it took quite a long time to get there, but it was a continuous thing. We kept pushing the Japanese back. Sometimes we had to invade islands in between where there were Japanese. There was a lot of islands out there, but other islands we just bypass them, and the Japanese that were this military people that were on that island, we just bypassed them, and they were out there in no man's land. They could not get anything. They couldn't do anything, so they didn't fare too well. But anyway, it was a long struggle. My brother was in that part of it, and matter of fact, he was in one of the biggest battles there, and he did a strange thing on the ship, though. They were in the lunch room in mess hall having lunch, and all of a sudden the general quarters sounded that they had to go to their battle stations. So all the other guys jumped up instantly and ran toward their battle stations. My brother Bill, instead of running, he swept up about a handful of chocolate cake, and he took off with his chocolate cake and ran to his battle station. But when he got there, everything was battened down, and he couldn't get in. So he had his chocolate cake. He went up to the main deck, the top deck of the ship, and sat there, leaned against the bulkhead, and was eating his chocolate cake while the Japanese planes were flying over. So, but he got away with it. Another time he was on the ship, and he went up the steps to the main deck. He opened the door to go out, and when he looked out, there was nobody out there, which is unusual because there's usually a lot of sailors out there on the deck doing something. There's nobody out there. He wondered, what the heck? It turned out that the Japanese planes were flying over and they were strafing the ship. So he decided to close the door, and he went back down the steps. So he had some close calls. But that was my big brother. The other thing was, there was a really bad side of this war. Periodically, some relative, some friend, some neighbor was killed in the war. And that was brutal. That was terrible. I had a neighbor kid. He was a few years older than me, but we were pretty good friends. He was in France and fighting the Germans. He was in a tank, and Germans had their tanks there. They were fighting with each other. And the Germans hit his tank and blew it up and killed my friend. right there on the spot. And then this other, the Battle of Okinawa, which I was talking about that a little earlier, my brother was in that. That's when the Germans had what they called the kamikaze planes flying around, attacking the ships. And what they did, the kamikaze was a fighter plane, and they trained teenage kids and young men to fly those planes. Then they would fill them up with powder, and explosives. And those planes, what they were supposed to do is to fly over the, don't do that. They would fly over the American ships and then dive them into the ships and crash them in. It would blow up the ship, but it would, of course, the pilots were always killed. And so that was brutal, but they had about 3,000 kamikaze planes that they used during that time in the war. That means 3,000 young people were killed by diving their planes into a ship. My brother's ship was not hit, but this neighbor of mine, another neighbor, he was on a destroyer, and they were shooting these planes down. Their gunners were fighting back. They were shooting these diving planes down before they got there, but finally one crashed on their deck, damaged the ship. Then another one damaged the ship some more. Then another plane crashed on their ship and crashed it some more, and it just flipped over the side and went down within a minute. And my neighbor went down with the ship. He never got out. So that's the brutal side of what was happening at the time. That was too much of that. Yeah. I already told you these. Well, while her whole family, that is, my dad and my two brothers and I were all in the Navy, my mother was home alone, so she volunteered in the local hospital to keep busy. So she did that for several years. Then also, at home, and this was while I was still home, there was a lot of foods that you couldn't get, and some were rationed. You'd only be able to get a certain amount of some of the things. And meat was rationed and scarce. Coffee was rationed and scarce. So was sugar and other things. And you couldn't buy tires for a car. It was almost impossible. My uncle managed finally to buy tires for his car, but he had a terrible time trying to buy tires because they were all used for the military. And gasoline was rationed. If you had a job where you had to drive your car to a defense plant where they're building weapons or wartime needs, they got all the gas they needed to do that. My mother and I were home alone, and we were considered as pleasure drivers. We got 3 gallons of gas a week, so we couldn't do a lot of driving. And also, in connection with that, I turned 16 during the war, and my brothers, my dad, my uncles, and everybody else was in the service. So I wanted to learn to drive the car, and there was nobody there to teach me. So the heck with this, I went out to the garage, opened the garage doors, backed the car out, and there was an alley behind our house. And I drove up and down that alley and some more and turned around and all kinds of things I was doing. Without any instructions, I was doing it on my own. Finally, I thought I was driving the car pretty well. So I got a learner's permit. So there, I could drive the car as long as I had a licensed driver with me. However, I had the permit. My mother had a driver's license, but she had it for years. and she never drove a car, and she didn't want to. So she was my licensed driver, a person that couldn't drive a car if she had to. And even when I went to take my driver's test, she was worried. She was my licensed driver that went along. She was afraid that the cops would make her move the car somewhere, and she couldn't do it. But that's how I got my driver's license then. I taught myself by driving in the alley, and then after that, I did all the driving. Oh, yeah. This was maybe a little silly, but during the war, we would have what they called blackouts, where you had to turn out all the lights, no lights whatsoever, close all your curtains, and that was an air raid drill. I didn't expect any planes to come flying over, but that's what it was. It was an air raid drill. But that would be periodically, and at the same time, several volunteer men in the neighborhood would be wearing their hard hat, and they were patrolling the streets while the raid was going on. So that was part of it. The blackouts, it wasn't an air raid. Sometimes they just have a blackout, so if planes did come over, they couldn't see the town, and everybody had their all lights out, and it was interesting, but I don't know how much good it did. Anyway, you know, my dad was called back, like I said, in 41. My oldest brother went in 43. My next brother went in 44, and I went in 45 on my 17th birthday, I enlisted. And of course, Bill went into Pacific. He was on this, what they call what the heck was it called? It was a big cruiser. It was smaller than a battleship, but bigger than the customary cruisers. It was a new invention anyway. So he was out there with this, it was a battle cruiser, they called it. And he was patrolling and fighting the Japanese in the Pacific for a long time. But then in the Battle of Okinawa, that was brutal. And that's one where they had all these kamikaze planes coming in. So he was in the thick of it. My other brother, they put him on an aircraft carrier, and he was in the Atlantic and trying to get rid of the Germans. And yeah, and going back, when I first went in the Navy, I had to go to what they call boot camp. That's where you go in and learn all the things about how to be a sailor. And my first brother went in, and he went to boot camp first, and he had to go to 4 weeks of boot camp. Then my other brother went in. He had 6 weeks of boot camp. Then when I enlisted, I got 12 weeks of boot camp. Well, it was getting near the end of the war. You know, they didn't need us too much. They weren't trying to push us out too fast, I guess. But I enjoyed boot camp. Of course, there's a wooden rifle down here. I had to carry that wooden rifle, and we marched all over the drill field. The temperature was a little over 100 that day. And we started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we marched until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, marching around carrying that stupid wooden rifle. When I went back to the barracks after that, I walked back, and I took my T-shirt off, getting ready to take a shower. The guy in the bunk next to me said, "Hey, you have scarlet fever. You better go to the sick bay." And I was all red. And of course, while we were marching, it started early in the afternoon, I started getting a sore throat, and I didn't feel too good. But I kept marching until 5 o'clock. Then I took my rifle and turned it in, and that's when I went back and took my T-shirt off and showed that apparently this guy thought I had scarlet fever. But anyway, I took his advice and I went to sick bay, and I had scarlet fever. I didn't know it, but I was marching all day with scarlet fever. And they sent me to a hospital. And in the hospital, there was an old geezer doctor there. Penicillin was brand new at the time. And he said to me, I'll knock that scarlet fever right out of you within a day or so. And he gave me a double shot of a double shot of penicillin in the seat. I had to bend over a desk, and he shot me with it and gave me penicillin. And you know what? Within days, I got rid of that scarlet fever. That's when penicillin was brand new. It worked real well. Anyway, then of course I went back to my company and did what we had to do. Oh, and an interesting thing had happened when I was in boot camp. My dad was a chief petty officer. He was in Bainbridge at the same time. He was there I think he was teaching at a quartermaster school at that time. When I went in, and of course I was just a recruit at the time, and we were in our barracks. We were on the second floor of a barracks, and I was in there one day, and this other sailor, he came to me, he said, hey, there's a chief out here, and he wants to see you. What did you do? And of course, the chiefs were treated like officers when we were in boot camp. We had to salute them and everything else. So that was scary to that guy, because that chief out there wanted to talk to me. I went out, and it was my dad. So I wasn't in any trouble. I was just visiting my dad. He was teaching in a quartermaster school on the other side of the whole camp. So that was interesting. So eventually, after I got out of boot camp, I went to quartermaster school, because that's what the rate that my dad had, and I think he rigged it up that I would go to that school. And of course, that's the best job in the Navy. The quartermaster steers the ship. He helps with the navigation, is on the bridge at all the times, and knows where we're going and where we came from, and knows everything. It's on the bridge. So that was a good job. I didn't go wrong there. But when I went to quartermaster school, we had different teachers, and they teach different parts of what we had to know. But then we went to this one navigation school room. The teacher was my dad. So he taught me how to prepare maps and how to navigate a ship. He did that. And so that was a little strange. But anyway, in the evenings, I used to go from where I was at boot camp, and I'd hike across and go over and visit him in his barracks where he lived. And so I was able to visit my dad while I was in boot camp. Oh, yeah. In boot camp too, we had to get exercises and things like that. So we were assigned to march out to a certain spot on the base, and we got there. There was a man. I think he was a petty officer, chief petty officer, sitting in a stuffed chair on top of a wooden platform, and that's where we had to go, and we stood in front of him. And while that guy sat comfortably in his chair, he was giving us the commands to do certain exercises and counting for us. We'd have to do 50 of this or something, and he made us go through all this stuff. But the bad part of this whole thing was that guy that was teaching us or making us do that, he was my gym teacher in high school. And I didn't like that guy in high school even. So when he made me do all those exercises, I didn't like him any better. But that was a strange coincidence. So, let's see, what else did I do here? Oh, we had to run the obstacle course. That's where they have all kinds of things. You have to climb through a pipe, and you got to go across like a horizontal ladder, hand over hand, and all kinds of weird things we had to do. And I was in good physical condition. I was a young 17-year-old, and I was in boot camp with a bunch of old men. They were 30 years old, and they couldn't do any of that stuff. They suffered like all heck. And like the ladder up there, as soon as they got out of my way, I jumped up, grabbed one, I skipped about 3 or 4 rungs and went to the next one. I went right across there and zipped just like that. And I enjoyed that like all heck. So in the evening after we were finished for the day, I went down there and ran the obstacle course again just for the fun of it. So, but the old guys at 30, they suffered very, very badly. You know, there was one time at boot camp where we had to go to another place, and there was an aircraft cannon there, aerial cannon, and they made us shoot that darn thing. And it took about 6 guys to do it. One would get the cartridges are about this long and get it and carry it over and give it another guy, and he'd push it into the back of the gun. Another guy, I guess, would pull the trigger, I don't know what, and then when it would shoot it, the cartridge would fly out and somebody had to catch it, and then he'd put it on a pile and then you'd kick it to the side. So it was a 6-man crew or something for all those things. That was a little scary, but I know one guy passed out. He was scared to death of our group. He was afraid of it. And but you know, that was all part of the game. Oh, and then we went to another classroom where it was dark inside, and they had a screen, and they had silhouettes of military aircraft on the screen that they'd flash them on, and we were supposed to identify them, say what it was and whose it was. And there was a lot of planes there that had 4 engines, and they were big, but we had them, and so did Japan, and all kinds of that looked alike to me. And but we were supposed to, when they flashed the plane on the screen, we were supposed to yell what this plane is and who it belonged to. So every one of those darn 4-engine planes, I'd yell out, it was a Japanese Betty, they called them. That was a bomber that the Japanese had. Well, they probably were, some of them were American planes, you know, I didn't know the difference. And I think somebody told somebody else, don't let that guy be on a gun crew. So I became a quartermaster. I steered the ship, though, and I enjoyed steering the ship. I steered a ship through the Panama Canal. I steered one up the Hudson River. I was on the wheel for 10 hours because the other quartermaster was having a hangover. He was drunk the night before. But I liked to steer the ship. I didn't care how long I had to be on the wheel. Let's see. Yeah, it was after the boot training. I went to quartermaster school, Then I was sent to a Navy base up in Newport, Rhode Island. There I went on a cruiser, and that's when we were riding around in the North Atlantic looking for German submarines. We didn't find any, but we were looking for them. And then a little later, I was sent to Philadelphia. There was a brand new cruiser that just slid down from being manufactured and was just first time in the water. And they had the commissioning ceremonies to make an official ship out of it for the Navy. And during that ceremony, I was assigned to pull the American flag up the top of the mast when the ship was officially commissioned, and I did that. And then I was on that ship for several years, and that was the best ship I was on. And even the food was good. The food on that ship, we had a real good cook. And not only that, he took care of us. If I had to stand watch something, like we had the quartermasters in port had to stand watch at the quarter deck where the gangway is, so that nobody can come up the gangway. You shoot them if they're coming up. And so I had to do that. And in this one ship, we were carrying 45 revolvers in a holster when we were on a quarter deck. I never even unclipped that holster. I didn't want any part of that gun because I was never trained on that gun. I didn't know anything about it. I couldn't shoot it. So I just left it where it was. I never took it out. There was another quartermaster that later was doing the same thing. He never shot a gun neither, not that one anyway. And he stupidly took it out of the holster. He held it up in the air. He cocked it and he pulled the trigger and he shot up over the ship next to us. I don't know where the bullet went, but it went somewhere over there. So I don't think he stood quarter deck watches after that. So you have that sort of thing too that happens. Okay, I guess after the war, after the surrenders, I was part of the occupation of Germany and North Africa and France. We had troops all over there at that time. We took over the countries, and I went on Liberty, we used to stop at all the different ports, especially in Italy. I was in Naples, and we went to Trieste, which is at the northeast corner of northern Italy, is where Trieste, the city of Trieste was. And Yugoslavia was over here, and Italy over there, and they both claimed it as theirs, so they were fighting with each other all the time about it. And this one day, every time I went ashore, no matter where it was, on Liberty, all the other guys went to the nearest bar and stayed there all night, and then they went back to the ship. I never went in the bars. I went ashore and I walked every street in that town. No matter how big the city was, I was everywhere. I walked all over the thing. I did that everywhere. And then in Trieste, when we were in Trieste, we were told not to cross the line between Italy and Yugoslavia. And they didn't say why. They said, you're not supposed to go across it. So this one day, instead of hiking around the town, I took a hike out into the country. I was following this dirt road. I went quite a ways, maybe several miles. And there was a big green area, like a big green field there. So I went across the green field and was hiking along, enjoying the scenery. And then I looked around a little bit. Uh-oh, I'm in Yugoslavia, and I'm not supposed to be here. And I always did dumb things like that. Anyway, I ended up in Yugoslavia, so I decided, well, I'm getting out of here. I went back the way I came in. I went back out to the road and went back to the ship. Never told anybody that I was in Yugoslavia. But I think it was about 40 years later, my son Jack was watching a historical program on television, and he called me to come and see it because they were talking about the problems between Yugoslavia and Italy back in the years right after the war. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I went out to watch it, and I recognized that grassy field that I thought, oh, I walked across there. I was bragging to him about it. Oh boy, went over there, and of course I came back across it again. And then after we watched for a little while, they were talking about it, and the announcer just said, and they are just now clearing the mines from the boundary between Yugoslavia and Italy. So I walked through a live minefield that way, turned around, came back across it, and I never blew myself up. So, no, and one time I was in the Navy base. What the heck is that Navy base in the Caribbean? Yeah.
Guantanamo?
Yeah. Huh?
Guantanamo?
Yeah. I was in Guantanamo. See, it's good to have. By the way, I'll tell you, on the way up here, the sun was shining in my eyes in the car, and I was getting annoyed with it. So I said, "Dumb son." He was insulted. But then where was I when I got carried away with that? Anyway, yeah, in Panama, of course, we weren't supposed to leave the base. I didn't care about that. I took a hike, walked along the shoreline first, then I headed back in, and I went into Cuba. We weren't supposed to do that. But I hiked into Cuba, and I came to a church there. It was abandoned, and there was a little cemetery alongside of it. And there was a guy named Ralph McSherry buried there. He died in the 1700s. So I figured, well, he's a relative, but I didn't dig him up to see what. Anyway, I hiked way about 5 miles into Cuba, which, like I said, we weren't supposed to do. And when I was coming back, when I was about 200 feet from the border into the Navy base, a Marine came out with a rifle and said, "What are you doing out here? You're not supposed to be out here." "Oh, did I cross the line?" We were real innocent like. And he said, "Yeah, get back where you belong." Okay. I went across the line, and I was back in the base again. So I even got in trouble on the Rock of Gibraltar one time. I decided I wanted to go to, there was a real big gun at the top of the Rock of Gibraltar aimed toward the Mediterranean Sea at the entry from the ocean. So I wanted to get a better look at that gun, so I climbed up the side of the Rock of Gibraltar, and I was within maybe 50 feet of the top where the gun was. Suddenly an English soldier with a rifle came between me and said, "What are you doing up here?" And he said, "Get out of here, turn around, go back down." So I didn't get a chance to look at the big gun. I had to turn around and go back down to where I started from. So I guess I wasn't too obedient at times. I did what I wanted to, whether I was supposed to or not. Anyway. Oh yeah, Alexandria, Egypt. We went there, we anchored out, and of course I went ashore. And this was supposed to be one of the toughest cities in the world at that time. But this friend of mine, he went ashore with me, and we were specifically told if we go from the city and hike, if we go from the docks and hike through the Arab section of the city, either walk in groups of 5 or take a taxi. And the two of us, we don't need a group of 5. So we started walking through the Arab section of the city and wanted to see what was down there. And all of a sudden I felt something hit my pant leg. I looked down, there was eggs on my pant leg. And this little old Arab was sitting on the sidewalk. He got up, he was an old guy. He come over with a rag and he bent down and he cleaned the egg off of my pant leg, and nice guy. And then when he was, after he cleaned it, then he said I was going to give him a tip of a few piastres, which wasn't worth a darn. And when he stood up, he didn't want the money. He wanted all of my money. And he had a knife. Matter of fact, there's one like it in that glass there. It's one of these knives this long with a bend in it. Well, he held it against this rib. He held it against this rib and said he wanted all my money. So I had a problem there. But he stood about this tall, and he was an old guy. So I decided, well, I'm going to just belt him in the face and send him flying. And I was all ready to do that. Then I looked around. We were completely surrounded with Arabs, and they were all mean looking. So I figured, well, we got a problem here. Then out of the clear blue, there's some guy, he was an Egyptian. He was wearing one of those red fezzes, and he was on a horse and carriage. He came riding in to the crowd, told us to jump aboard, and and we did right away. We got aboard, and he took us out of there. Then we went downtown, and when we got up, we're ready to get off. He asked me for an enormous amount of money. I can't remember what it was now, but a lot of money. And I wouldn't give it to him, so he was raising a rumpus. And there was an Egyptian cop standing nearby. So I asked him, what about this guy? He said, give him what he wants. Well, I didn't give him what he wants. I think I gave him a few pieces of money and took off. And it cost me a little bit of money, but it didn't cost me as much as everybody else wanted. So I concluded that whole bunch was in cahoots. The old guy was working for him, and the circle of Arabs that circled us was. The guy with a black carriage was probably in the group, and so was the cop. That's how they robbed people. Anyway, we weren't supposed to go with less than 5 people. Well, there was only 4 of us. So that's why they attacked us, but they didn't get much. Now, yeah. That's all I have on my stupid listing here. What did I forget, Jack?
Wasn't there an incident in Brooklyn Navy Yard going into a bar?
When I what?
Brooklyn Navy Yard. You went into the bar?
Oh, that wasn't much of an event. This friend of mine, we were in New York City. The ship was tied to a dock in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, but we went over to New York downtown and spent the evening. And on the way back, it was close to midnight. We were walking down the sidewalk, and we went by this bar. It was all lit up, and the doors were open. And we looked in, and we saw most of our crew was in there, so we decided just to go in and visit them. So we went in, and they all cheered because I came in, because I never drank any alcoholic beverages. I never went to the bars. So these guys were all excited because I came walking into the bar there, and they were all greeting me. And somebody told the bartender, give him a drink. So I went over to the bar, and he asked what I wanted. I said, glass of milk. So he gave me a glass of milk. I drank that, and he gave me another, and I drank a second glass of milk. Then I went over and said goodbye to the guys and went out the door and went back to the ship. So I took the crew sort of offhand there. I don't think I, this is my memory. That's, if you think, that's why I'm looking in there. Anyway, hey.
The question and answer period. Jack, anything else if you wanted to add, or else we'll go to the
So-
question and answer period?
What's that?
So, how about before the question and answer period, our former president Kirk would like to give you a gift here, and then we'll go to question and answers. Would that be okay, Kirk? So we just make sure we cover it, So
What's that?
Kirk wants to give you a present. Well, Kirk will explain. Here you go.
Jack, several years ago, we had a meeting and decided it was wonderful to have the World War II vets come and talk to us and tell us about their remarkable memories and life as it was before we knew it. And we decided we should give them an honorarium of some sort. We thought perhaps a large cash contribution would be nice. We quickly dismissed that idea because we didn't have any money. We thought, however, perhaps a medal or a badge or something that people could show, like they do military regalia. But we didn't have a badge, we didn't have a medal. So we came up with another thought, that what could we give somebody that he could use daily and remember us. And so with our thanks, I'd like to present you with a highly sought after artifact as a remembrance of our organization.
Oh, I am.
And I hope you use it daily. It holds coffee, it also
Hey.
holds spirits.
I could put my milk in this.
So thank you so much, and
Yeah.
I hope you make good use of that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Where'd
Kirk,
Jack
and
go?
thank you, Jack. And so now we'll
There he
open up
is.
the floor for any questions that you guys might have. Yes, so we'll go right up front here first.
Jack, on all these trips that you took hiking in places that you weren't supposed to be, were you wearing the Navy uniform or were you in civilian clothes?
I'll translate for the hearing impaired.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, was he talking to me?
He said,
Pick that up for me.
when you were off limits and all those places you weren't supposed to go, were you wearing your uniform?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't worry about such things. I should have been in trouble many times, but I was never I don't think I was ever in trouble. I don't remember being in trouble.
How about Commander Gregor?
The what? Commander Gregor?
Why'd you get transferred off to Huntington?
Well, I did one time. I hate to say this, but I had to go before the captain's mast, which is the lowest court in the Navy. I was a quartermaster of the watch, and I was in the pilot house. We were out at sea, and there was an open bridge directly above us, and the officer of the deck was up there. And I think he was trying to prove something to me, because I didn't do anything wrong. But he wanted me to come up to the open bridge, which I did. That was, the officer deck had a right to do that. And somebody threw up there, and he told me to clean it up. And I said, "Sir, I can't do it. I'm on watch, and I can't do it, but I'll get someone to do it." He said, "I told you to do it." He was real mean. So I didn't do it. I just, the heck with you, Harry. And so I went down and laid in my bunk for the rest of the afternoon. I walked off of watch. I was on watch on the bridge. And I walked in. So I did a bad thing. I was put on report by that grouchy officer for disobedience of orders of the officer of the deck, which sounds like a serious offense. And finally, the day came to go to captain's mast. And instead of the captain governing it, lieutenant, or what do they call him?
The executive office.
The executive officer was handling that day. So the officer that had reported me, he gave his side of the story and said all about what the bad things that I did. Then they asked me, what do you want to do? What do you have to say in your defense? I said, nothing. So the officer, the executive officer made the decision then. I had a 20-day leave coming up. He canceled it, which, so what? But the funny thing was, the officer of the deck, or the executive officer, he was a commander. Previously, he was the navigator. And he and I used to help him do the navigation. So we were good buddies. So he just stepped in and took over because it was me. And the punishment I got was he had to do something, was negative, and I could have gone to jail for 2 years, you know. But
then you stayed on then you were on the abandoned ship and wrote yourself passes to get off.
well, I said one time on the ship to one of the officers that I said, if you transfer me off of this scow, I'll swim ashore. And I liked the ship. It was the best ship I was ever on. But that's what I said. By darn, they transferred me off of it and put me on a stupid destroyer. And I didn't like that at all. And that's the other thing. The food in the Navy on the Huntington, the cruiser, was excellent. Really good food. And every Wednesday for breakfast, we had baked beans, and I made sure I got there in time for that. But what was I heading for? Suddenly I went blank. Anyway,
You were saying about, I think you got the answer, you're saying about you got transferred off the ship.
oh, I know. I went to that stupid destroyer, and I went in the mess hall for lunch. And I sat down, started getting ready to eat my soup. I had the spoon all ready to go. And there was a cockroach about that long drowned in my soup. And I didn't like that too much, so I didn't eat it. And but the Huntington, the cruiser that I was on, we didn't have any vermin on there whatsoever. We didn't have any rats. We didn't have any cockroaches. We had nothing. It was a new ship. But this old destroyer, it was in World War II, and it was an old destroyer, and I wasn't happy at all with that, especially when I got served the cockroach to eat.
I think we have another question for you.
Who has a question?
Hey, Mr. McSherry, first of all, thank you for your service. Second, on the one photo, you're on an open bridge. Looks like you have a brassard on and a baton. Were you going out on shore patrol in that picture?
He wants to know the shore patrol story.
I was only on shore patrol once. They didn't normally send quartermasters on shore patrol, but we were in North Africa. What they?
Iran or Alexandria? Iran or?
We were in Oran, Algeria, and I was chosen for some reason to go on shore patrol. So here, where is it? Anyway, yeah, down there. See that club on the end of I wore that belt with a club on it, and I was on shore patrol. I was a cop. I went ashore. And I went ashore at 8 o'clock in the morning on shore patrol duty, and I was walking around. The purpose, if there would have been any American sailors not behaving or doing something annoying, I could arrest them. But I didn't have to arrest anybody. Everybody was okay. But this French girl, about that big, came and started walking alongside of me. I was out on patrol, and she walked alongside me for hours. So I had company just on a shore patrol duty. But that was the only time I was ever on shore patrol. They didn't usually use quartermasters for shore patrol. We were above that.
Yes, so question over here.
You catch this.
The
I have a
picture on
hearing
the
aid,
screen,
but it's not doing much good.
get a picture on the screen right there. Is that a picture of the pilot house that you steered the boat from, the ship from?
He wants to know if that picture is in the pilot house, was taken in the pilot house.
Matter of fact, yeah, it is. That is taken in the pilot house. That's where I spent most of my time, on the pilot house. Matter of fact, on the Huntington, and later on, I was on a submarine tender. I spent a year in Panama with that ship. But I never slept in the cruise quarters. They had these bunks, like one here, one here, one here, and I slept in them once or twice, but I just hardly ever slept in any of them. I went up to the bridge. I throw this mattress that I had either on the pilot house deck or in nice weather on the open bridge deck, and that's where I used to sleep. In the daytime, I'd stash the mattress away somewhere. But yeah, I always slept. This one time, there was a very narrow walkway in front of the pilot house that wrapped around the pilot house. Nobody ever used it. And this one night, I don't know why it was, but I decided to sleep there on that projection. But the wind was blowing very hard, so I found a big box, a cardboard box, and put it there. I put my head in the box so it wouldn't blow me around while I was sleeping. And so I slept there all night. But during the night, I was told that when they changed officers of the deck every 4 hours, they'd have a new one. When he came in, he saw somebody sleeping out there. He said, "Who's that sleeping out there on the deck?" And they said, "That's McSherry." Oh, it was no surprise to him. But yeah, I slept outdoors all the time. I didn't like sleeping in the crowded hammock or the areas.
Any other questions real quick that anybody has? Last question or two? Anybody? Okay, then I guess we'll conclude tonight's evening. Thank you all for attending so much. And real quick before we go, next month we have a historian named Larry Alexander will be here with us on December 1st. He wrote a book he'll present a book on Dick Winters called Biggest Brother. I have a copy of the book. Laura from our volunteer, Laura has a copy of the book too. So he also plans to sell some books as well. So he'll be here next month. Thank you guys. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for our speaker. Thank you. Thank you.